show or a Netflix series or whatever. And so they believe, why not? It could be true. Maybe it is true. And so we are left with a conundrum. Since we are all ministers of the word, we are all servants of God, we are all salesmen in the gospel business. And the conundrum is this: God, who obviously is the ultimate expression of truth, he has his critics and detractors. And this is why the Bible is so lengthy, because there are so many people who refuse to believe, who refuse to accept what he says, who are skeptical or even critical or detract from what he's saying, and not just on this planet Earth. It actually happened in heaven itself. And then on the opposite side of the coin, you've got Satan. The very Hebrew word Satan means an accuser, a prosecutor. And yet you know that the world is filled with people who admire and support Satan. I had a group of high school students in my current. Unmute your mic. Mute your mic.
I'm sure that Pastor Tan can tell more.
Hello. I have a group of girls in my homeroom this year. Well, they've actually graduated now. They fell in love with a particular TV show on Netflix called Lucifer. I don't know if any of you watched. One of the girls is a Christian kid from a strong, devout Baptist background. And they work so hard to try and get me to watch the show so that I can, understand the world they're in and we can have discussions about it. And I asked them, I said, why do you want to watch the show about Lucifer? Well, it's interesting, and many of the ideas, maybe they are possible. Well, to appease them, I did watch one episode so that I can at least discuss with them or maybe straighten up what they were learning or what they thought they were learning. This is a conundrum. People not always sure that God is the truth, and others equally admiring of the devil. In the Bible, we meet that ultimate discussion and truth that occurred at the trial of Jesus before Pilate. Incidentally, this is recorded only by John. You don't find this in the synoptics. So the Jews accused Jesus of wanting to be a king. He's brought before Pilate. Pilate asked him this question: you are a king? Is that so? And Jesus says, well, that's what you say. You say that I am a king. But Jesus in John does not stop there. He says, I was born for this. That means to be a king. And I have come into the world for this. Well, not actually to be a king. I have come into the world to testify to the truth. And then Jesus adds the ultimate conclusion. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And Pilate is the only person in the Bible who actually dared to ask this question. So what is truth? If you are the truth, or you testify about the truth, and people who hear the truth listen to your voice, what is truth? Unfortunately for us, Pilate does not stop long enough to get an answer from Jesus. So we're sort of left hanging, even in the Gospel of John. Now, earlier in the Gospel of John, about 4 chapters earlier, Jesus had said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. However, that is tucked away in an enumeration. And so it's hard to decipher. But here was an occasion when everybody had an opportunity to, okay, let's listen. What is his definition of truth? Pilate does not. And so the gospel still leaves us in a conundrum about this. And why does that exist? I'd like to suggest that truth is so expansive, truth is so dynamic, that we often do not recognize there are different perspectives on it. Well, the first perspective, and usually the one that is kind of subconscious, very often it's culturally driven, or it's driven by your upbringing and family background, is what I call suppositional truth. This is what we suppose to be true. We don't always articulate it, we don't write books about it, but we all kind of believe it to be so. And so it determines our cultural attitudes, our cultural actions, our cultural norms and beliefs. I got a very interesting interpretation from two of my grade 11 girls on the last day of online school at the end of the semester. These two girls are very bright. One of them particularly is an A+ student. And that day, I didn't really teach any class since it was the final session, so they decided to hang out and chat with me. They spent the whole period online chatting with me. We went to all kinds of subjects. And then they started talking about why Thai people have so many superstitions. You know, if you live in this country, you discover, I suppose every country in Asia is like that, the people are filled with superstition. Everything is, oh, you cannot do this, oh, you cannot do that. These are suppositions. And so I asked them the question, I said, why do you think Thai people have so many superstition? And they gave me a supposition which led to the next aspect that I will highlight. They said, sir, I think that Thai people have so many superstition because they have no God. an amazing understanding from two grade 11 kids. Which brings us to this dimension. If you have a supposition running at the back of your head, running in your brain, whether that supposition comes from upbringing, cultural norms, or some ideas that hit your head, ultimately it will lead to a proposition, what we call what philosophers call propositional truth. We will say it out loud, like those girls did. Thai people are superstitious because they have no God. You may wonder what that means. In Thai Buddhism, there is no God. There isn't even a word for God. And so they say, you know, they said that in other religions, you've got God. In the Bible, you have God. And so people don't need to be superstitious so much because there is God. We don't have, and so we compensate with superstition. See, they were sharing a propositional idea, a concept, a motif, a thought. Then there is a third level. If there's a supposition running in your mind and then you propose an idea arising from it, ultimately that will get interpreted. You will use it as a lens, like these glasses, to interpret life that you see around you. And we'll come back to this. And then I believe that there is the ultimate, what I'm calling here intelligent truth, and you will see presently what that means. Okay, suppositional truth. If you look at that picture, is the figure in the picture running downstairs or running upstairs? In the picture, are these actual stairs or is it an optical illusion? Are there even stairs in this picture? Is the person going up or down? Every one of us lives by suppositional truth. We don't always recognize it, but it's there. Even as Christians, we have suppositional truth. Here is one that you will meet among many people. My mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts. You know, people love their plastic so much, they don't care how much you talk about climate change. In my homeroom, my classroom, students are not allowed to bring single-use plastic anymore. And they cannot do any assignments that involve plastic or foam. And all of them will ask a basic question, why, sir? Why not, sir? Everybody else allows us to do it. See, that is how suppositional truth works. It's okay, everybody's doing it, so it's fine. Here's a similar one, but a little different. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I learned this when I was in high school from my English teacher, that people never really change their opinion. It is that suppositional truth at the back of their heads that really determine everything they believe. And the only way to change a person is to change their supposition. For those of you who are ministers and preparing people for baptism, think about what this really means, how it impacts your work. I picked this up from, I was watching a Nigerian movie on Netflix. The nice thing about Netflix is they have movies from all over the world, not just English. And it's intriguing. And in this movie, there was a scene where these two girls they were university students, they were having a discussion. One of them was having some serious issues about life, questions about life, and so wondering which way to go and how to solve it. In other words, she's wrestling with truth. So her friend says to her, it's all about mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. Well, that is supposition. Because even if you don't mind, it could matter. And something could still matter whether you mind it or not. But let's get a little biblical. Here's my paraphrase of Hezekiah. He's had this grave illness. He pleads for healing. God heals him, performs a grand miracle. The Babylonian envoys arrive in Jerusalem. Instead of showing God to them, he showed off his wealth. God sends the prophet Isaiah saying these same people will come about 200 years later, but they will come and they will take away everything that you have shown them. And if you read Jeremiah carefully, particularly the way the Hebrew goes, he said something to this effect. Well, since that's not going to affect me personally, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, then it doesn't matter. He's like, it's okay, God can punish the nation, but as long as I'm not personally affected, it doesn't matter. And this is how some of the COVID-19 clusters have taken place around, because people just don't care as long as they think it doesn't affect them. That's a supposition of life. And then here's one, and this is a direct quote. Israel, God says, why do you complain that the Lord does not know your troubles? We make a supposition that when we are in trouble, when we are in pain or suffering, that maybe God is not aware. Those of you who attended the devotional this morning, you remember the Elijah episode. He made a supposition that he was the last one left, that no one else was still worshiping or serving God in the whole northern nation of Israel. That is suppositional truth. Suppositional truth eventually leads to propositional truth. Let me give you some samples, one from philosophy and one from church. And then ultimately, that leads to interpretation. Okay, Friedrich Nietzsche, late 19th century German philosopher, made a supposition that there is really no such thing as absolute in the universe. Well, he wasn't unique in this. There were other people before him and a lot more after him. And arising from that proposition, and this is a compact way of understanding Nietzsche, he ended up essentially teaching that God is dead. In fact, he is favored as having invented or coined this phrase. So if there's no such thing as absolute, then there cannot be God. And if there's no such thing as an absolute God, then the whole idea of God is dead. And what happened as a consequence? Well, then you have to reinterpret everything around you accordingly, whether it is nature or life itself. And ultimately, we call this a worldview. So arising from philosophies like Nietzsche and many others, or the rationalism of René Descartes, or the empiricism of John Locke, when you put all of these data together, the world became secular. It developed a secular worldview that found a scientific way to interpret the universe. And so the world ended up exchanging creation idea for a Big Bang theory. All because the supposition was there is no absolute, leading to a proposition that God is dead. So therefore we don't need to worry about God. We can decide our own things. And then the reinterpretation of life. But let's look at a more church-based cycle, how this can happen in church. Since all of you are involved with church in one way or another, I hope you pay attention. There is a supposition in many churches, Adventism included, that somehow church attendance equals spiritual salvation. This is why we have such uncomfortable terms like backsliding, unfaithful, disloyal, and not true Christian. So we suppose, even though there is no discussion to this effect anywhere in the Bible, but we suppose that church attendance equals spiritual salvation. And so when that happens, we arrive at a proposition. If you don't attend church, you are backsliding. Or a more interesting one that strikes very close to home because it's something that I meet within my family. If you don't become an Adventist, you will go to hell. We do this all the time. This is why we are so driven with mission, not because we see mission as a way of selling God to the world, whether they accept him or not, but as a way of ensuring that people are saved as though somehow we are the ones who save them. So what do? We create a worldview where salvation is all about church affiliation. Sometimes it can get to extreme where we say that the 144,000 of Revelation are Seventh-day Adventists. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses say the same thing. There was a group in Russia in the early 20th century who said the same thing. So we're not exactly unique in doing that. But you see, we're not the only ones who do that. Other Christians do this as well. In my school, about maybe 5-6% of the students are actually Christians, and they come from several denominations. Maybe 0.5% might be Adventist kids. So last year I was teaching a group of kids. It was a grade 12. And that particular grade 12 section had several Christian kids, a very disproportionate number of Christian kids. And one of them was a Seventh-day Adventist girl. She grew up in the church. Her mother even worked for the local mission for a while. And then one day she came to me, she said, "Sir, my Christian friends," they're all very good friends, by the way. And this other group, they were all from charismatic denominations. They said, "Sir, my Christian friends say that as an Adventist, I'm not a true Christian." I said, "Why are they saying that to you?" They said, "Because I don't speak in tongues and I don't believe in speaking in tongues." And so these charismatic Christians were making fun of this Adventist girl of not being a true Christian because she did not speak in tongues. And so I called the group and gave them a little journey into church history. And it changed their perspective. They realized what they had been doing, the charismatics and the Adventist girl as well. And so if your supposition is church attendance equals salvation, then you will tell people in word, in doctrine, or whatever, if you don't attend church, you are backsliding or you will be lost. And ultimately, you will interpret or develop a worldview where salvation is all about church affiliation. All right, so we need to get to the fourth dimension, which is of primary interest to me. Intelligent truth. What is this thing we call intelligent truth? In the Hebrew Bible, and since we have quite a few Hebrew fans in here, in the Hebrew Bible, this is Chokmah, and its parallel word, da'at. Chokmah is usually translated as wisdom, and its companion, da'at, is usually translated as knowing. I would like to suggest that knowing is a better translation than knowledge because it's more active form of da'at. And very often you'll see them together or very close to each other. So whatever intelligent truth is, it must involve da'at, which is an intellectual exercise, as well as chokmah, which is more of a spiritual exercise. What is more important is that chokmah and da'at have a starting point. And the starting point is here. The fear, yirat, of the Lord, Yahweh, is the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of chokmah and da'at. The fear of the Lord. I don't really want to say too much about the word fear here. It's simply one of the strongest descriptors of a loyal relationship with God. And this is Solomon writing, and this is in the prologue, the first discourse in the book of Proverbs. And he begins with this assertion early in that discourse, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning, is the starting point, it's the portal through which you enter Hokmah and Da'at. And here is the English translation. Notice that there is no verb, but there is an interesting word here, which is an echo of creation, and that is the word Reshith. Remember the first word in Genesis, Bereshith, in the beginning? The fear of Yahweh, beginning of Da'at. The fear of Yahweh, beginning of Da'at. Notice I have supplied is, as most English translations do. It's a nominal clause, and it has some interesting words here. So this Da'at thing, or Hokmah thing, begins with a relationship with God. It is spiritually driven. Its starting point is vertical, not horizontal. It's not from books. It is from God. Wisdom, knowing. What you have in this verse is the second part, wisdom, knowing. It's a play on Hendiadus, Hokmah Umusar, fools reject. Musar is a synonym of Da'at. So those who fear God, they will experience the Rashid of knowing. But fools will reject Hokmah and Musar. Now, think about this. Psalms 14 tells us that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. What it's talking about here is that if you suppose there is no absolute, and then you propose that God is dead, and then develop a worldview where God doesn't exist, that is the opposite of Hokmah and Da'at. Supposition, there is a God, leads to interpretation, knowing and wisdom. And this is interesting because this is what makes for this thing we call intelligent truth. So what do we mean by a biblical supposition that leads to that truth? Well, here's from Jesus. If you love those who love you, there is nothing special in that supposition. Even criminals can do that proposition. If you love your enemies, those who persecute you or abuse you, then you are children of your Father in heaven. Worldview, interpretation. This truth is intelligent because this love, this worldview, this mindset, this belief system can only come from God. None of us can love our enemies. But as children of God, we have extra power coming from God himself. In his last discourse in the Gospel of John, Jesus spends a lot of narrative space talking about the Holy Spirit, the Parakletos. And one of the things he said about the Parakletos, John 16, is he will teach you all truth. You can also translate, he will guide you into all truth. And that would include all of the dimensions of truth until truth becomes Hokmah and Da'at. That is truth. You know, this approach to truth makes it possible for us to understand other people and recognize where they are at without being judgmental about it, without putting them down. In my, not last year, last year, one of the students who's graduating this year, she was in grade 11 at the time. She comes from a very staunch Roman Catholic family. She came to me with a question. She said, "Sir, you know I'm a Roman Catholic." I said, "Yes, I know. What is your question?" She said, "Does that make me a Christian or not?" And so I was a little bit puzzled. I asked her, I said, "Why are you saying this? What makes you think that if you're a Catholic, you're not a Christian?" Well, this girl has been at our school since grade 1. So she has had a Bible class every day of her life for 11 years up to that point, or 12 years now that she has completed. And in all of those Bible classes, especially in the lower grades, until she got to the higher grades and then met me and so on. She had been made to believe over and over, it was hammered into her head that Catholics are not really Christians because, and then all those reasons were given, so forth. And so she completely doubted her own standing with God simply because of her church affiliation. I do not know if she would have ever become an Adventist in the school. I know that her family would probably never have allowed her to. And so I told her, I said, the word Christian simply means anybody who believed and followed Jesus. So I asked her, do you believe in Jesus? Do you follow him? She said, yes. So that makes you a Christian. But she's a very smart girl and said, then why do we have all these differences? I got to teach history again. I've discovered that when you're dealing with people who are outside of our own box, there is nothing that helps them understand the truth better than going into history and showing how history has brought about all these different dimensions of truth and why Adventists and Catholics and Baptists and all these other groups, what happened? How did they come about? What do they believe in? How does that differ from everything else? So we can see the threads of commonality, but also the great points of differences. And then how it impacts our worldview. Ultimately, it's all about that worldview. When I decided to take theology as a major, I had absolutely no clue that I would spend all of my life teaching the Bible. At that point, I was thinking more about, okay, I'll probably get into ministry and be a pastor. And I have been a pastor, not just of Adventist churches, but even one that is not. So that has been part of my resume. But then I discovered by the end of my first year of service to the church that I think I will be teaching Bible the rest of my life. And all my educational pursuits has not simply been to earn a degree, to wear a fancy hat, or to have a certificate, but to see how I can sharpen my skills in teaching the Word of God. And one of the things that I have done practically every day of these 40 years, like Paul says, in season and out of season, is to teach the Bible. And the amazing thing is that COVID-19 has done nothing but accelerate that process through social media, through media, and so on. It's been a great journey, a great ride. I cannot imagine a day when I went around and I did not end up with some kind of Bible lesson with somebody somewhere. Even a horrible northern storm over Holland that left me stranded in Amsterdam for 24 hours with no food and no warmth. I had to give a Bible lesson. There was a new ager from Australia who sat with me, and she had questions. Finally, she learned, okay, you're a religion teacher. And do you know that class lasted for 8 hours? I'm shivering in the cold with only a blanket wrapped around and only chocolate that Singapore Airlines provided to create heat. And the storm prevented supplies. There was no food to eat, especially for a vegetarian in Holland. It's really hard. And this lady, Sikh background, New Ager, Australian, very worldly, she fired question after question after question. I taught Bible for 8 hours nonstop with my jaws chattering a little bit in the cold. Every day, everywhere, every occasion. I did not imagine this would happen when I graduated in 1980 with my undergrad piece of paper that says I have a degree in theological studies. But that worldview, that lifestyle arose from a supposition that I made that the Bible is God's word. And then everything that arose from there in terms of actual teaching, in terms of actual worldview, and then in terms of actual life. I'm not going to go all the way to 12. You know me, I can, but I think we have been here for a while. We need to have lunch. I need to have lunch. But I will leave you with a question, keeping in mind the four dimensions and how they move from supposition to proposition to interpretation and ultimately, hopefully, to intelligent truth, to hokmah and the art. And that is this: what is your suppositional truth? You know, the rest will follow almost automatically, almost reflects action. What is your suppositional truth? Now, those of you who follow me on Facebook, you know that about 3 weeks ago, I revived a lost part of my life. I know that Mark is a great cyclist, so is Nat, and some of you are. I decided I got bored of just walking every morning, and I walk a lot, about 5 kilometers every day. I am in great health right now, but I thought I need to spice this up a little bit. So what to do? Because of COVID-19, I do my exercise very early in the morning, around 4:30, 5 o'clock, before people come out while it's still kind of dark. So I walk through my village from where I reside in this village to the security place. Is about 1 kilometer, so it's easy to gauge yourself. So I decided to go and buy a bicycle, nothing fancy, just enough to get on. The question in my mind, it really nagged me, can I still ride? I haven't been on a bike for 20 years. I mean, literally. And then I realized, wait a minute, all through my high school and college days, I lived on the bicycle. Every time we needed to go somewhere, needed to go to town, it was by bike. I went on cycling tours. Some of you may find that hard to believe. What? Yes. Okay, I'm sure I can still ride. Now, believe you me, I was a bit tentative and a bit shaky at the beginning, and it took about 2-3 days for me to feel that steadiness and that comfort on the bike. But the supposition in my brain was, no, I can still ride the bike. And so the idea, the proposition that arose, let me buy a bike and add this to my exercise pattern. And the interpretation is, yeah, I can ride the bike. So let's see what else I can do now that I can still ride the bike. What is your supposition? What is the thing that drives you? If you're constantly worried at your worldview level that God may not always help you, that God is not there when you need him most, then the problem is your supposition. Job's friends suppose that the righteous cannot suffer. God is not like that. And they compounded his suffering by victimizing a victim. God's supposition about Job, despite the fact that Job sunk into depression, despite the fact that Job would actually question God and curse the day of his birth, God's supposition stated right at the outset of the book is, this is my servant Job, who is Tom, who is Tamim, who is perfect, who's flawless. And God never changed his supposition. So he challenged Satan, or rather he accepted the challenge of Satan to play his tricks on Job. Job comes out on the other side with a greater view of God and all that. Job's supposition in all of his suffering is that this is not from God. No matter how deep his depression, no matter how much pain he was having physically and emotionally, Job clung on to that supposition that this is not his God. This is not the doing of his God. He remained loyal. Supposition, by the way, may be found in a cave. I like Brian's devotional this morning. It may be found anywhere, but it's mostly found in your mind. Perhaps this is what Jesus meant when he says, as a person thinks in his heart, that means in his mind, that is what the person is really like. I think Jesus is talking about that subconscious supposition that governs and guides everything we do. I think when we get that, then the rest falls in place. You know, when I was a kid growing up in the Adventist church, ultra conservative during that period, the supposition that was hammered into my head is that God is our judge and he is waiting to find fault with us. And so constantly worried about the next wrong thing I might be doing, living a life so guilt driven that I was prepared when I was 15, 16 years old to actually give up on this God. What kind of a God? I'm not comfortable living this way. You know, those questions of doubt and guilt and so on no longer exist because somewhere along the way I replaced that supposition that no, this is not God. My God is a God of grace. And a God of grace always stands up for his people. And the longer I teach the Bible, the stronger that supposition comes out. And so I can speak openly and freely about God's grace and God's love and God's justice and all the rest of it. I can apply it to all of the issues of life without losing sleep at night, without guilt feelings, without fear. You may find this hard to believe, but that's how I am at the moment. Completely free mind every single night. And be able to rest and know whatever happens, COVID or no COVID, death or no death, grave or no grave, see Jesus come back alive or not see Jesus come back alive, none of it is going to make any difference whatsoever. As Job said, I know whom I believed. Because you see, intelligent truth, Hokmah, and the art takes you back to the source, which is God himself. And so I hope that you will examine your understanding of truth, and somewhere along the line that it will enhance your thinking. Remember, if you have a supposition, it will become an idea, a proposition. It will lead to a worldview, an interpretation. Hopefully, it will lead you closer to God, to that intelligent view, and realize it all begins from him anyway. It doesn't begin from me. I hope that you got a little bit of lesson this morning. Maybe not what you were anticipating, but you are merchants of truth, as I am. And the more expansive your understanding of that truth, the greater will be your value to that business. At the very least, I hope that in your mind, you will realize what Job learned, that God has a supposition about us, and that is, you are my servant. You are Tom, you are Tamim, not because you do not fail, but because of how I value you. See, my ultimate value comes from God, not from me. I've earned a lot of degrees, and you know, nothing has made me more proud and more happy than to attend the doctoral graduation for Gerard and Ben, and to work through with Joe on his PhD dissertation, and to get a message from Robert saying that SAT has accepted him provisionally into the PhD program. Nothing makes me happier than each time one of you graduate with some degree, whatever it is, whether it's an MMin or a PhD, makes no difference, because I know you're moving forward. And to realize that maybe I had a small little piece of that journey somewhere along the way. But I think what fills my heart with joy and pride is not your academic achievements, but your truth achievements. I can hear it in what you say. I can see it in the things that you write, in the things that you think about. And so I hope that in our chat this afternoon, resurrecting our theology forum concept, that we will get to exchange ideas with each other. So thank you for listening. And if you are still awake, some of you had the habit of sleeping in some of my classes. You say I'm an interesting teacher and yet you slept, but this is pre-lunch class, not post-lunch class. So if you're still awake, I hope you can remember those 4 things. Supposition leads to proposition, it will get interpreted, but hopefully it leads you back to the source of true Hokmah and Da'at, and that is to God. So for all those of you who are fathers and staring at me in the screen or not showing your face, I wish you a very happy Father's Day. Okay, and I trust that you will enjoy that sense, even though it may be not so important as some other day in life. But I hope that our time together today will, I don't know, provide you some extra unleaded fuel for your ministry, for your work. That just being in the presence of one another, we discover strength in the presence of God. This God is not just up there, He is in here. He is among us right now. If you see a blank icon in there, maybe it is God who is on Zoom with us. By the way, that's one of my suppositions with everything I do, that somehow God is right there. Not up there, but He's right here, right next. So it determines the way that I live. And this is why I keep teaching the Bible, because that's what He called, what He gave me to do, and it can never be anything less. All right, that's it for today. Robert, do you have any announcements or anything before we?
Yes, sir. Housekeeping announcement. Let me come back right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Father's Day to you. And my wife is cooking chicken curry today for me to celebrate the Father's Day. And
we can start earlier.
Okay. So
Robert?
before we close, we are going to have a group photo for a morning session. It is part of attendance taking. It affects your 10% of your grades. So I'd like to request each and every one of you to on your camera and give you the best smile. If you don't have smile, at least let's shine your head bright, yeah? All right, let's do this. Okay, everyone, are you ready? All right, I'm on the first page. Give me your smile.